When she said she spoke to God, no one believed her. Days later, they apologized on their knees. Jane woke up at 6 a.m., turned towards the window, and gazed at the sky. For a moment, she admired the sun peeking through the clouds before getting out of bed. Kneeling by her bedside, looking beyond her window, she began to pray, "Dear God, thank you for another day of life and for this beautiful sky. May your light shine on me today, and reach everyone around me. Help me have the strength for what I already know I'll face today. Amen." Poor Jane, as soon as she stood up, a wave of sadness overcame her heart, knowing what awaited her at school. She got dressed and headed out. She was a sophomore in high school with no friends. Everyone thought she was odd and dressed strangely. Jane couldn't dress up or wear makeup because her father, a deeply religious man, believed it would attract unwanted attention. Upon arriving at school, some students immediately began hurling cruel comments her way. "Good morning, nun. Did Jesus let you out of your room today?" they mocked, but Jane was used to it and just let it slide. Jane was a shy, introverted, and very religious girl. Her parents were strict and advised her to befriend only church members, a reason enough for her classmates to mock her relentlessly. However, she always tried to spread her faith whenever possible, convinced it was best for them. Jane's family wasn't wealthy. Her father, Paul, worked as a church janitor, and her mother, Linda, was a seamstress. When Paul fell ill, Jane tried selling sweets to help support her family, leading some students to taunt her, claiming, "God should pay your bills." Jane suffered a lot at school, but she was intelligent, diligent, and a good student. Her dream was to graduate high school soon and enter a college where no one knew her, so she could start anew and make friends. One day, during a math class, the teacher called on Jane to solve an equation at the board. As she walked up, she heard laughter but didn't understand why. Just before she reached the board, a girl shouted, "Hey Jane, I heard your parents are drowning in debt, but it looks like your skirts are still in line." Jane looked down and saw her clothing stained with a red blotch. Embarrassed, she began to cry and ran out of the classroom. Her classmates seemed to enjoy her distress, which hurt Jane deeply. During breaks, Jane would sit on a secluded bench at the back of the schoolyard, look up at the sky, and share her thoughts with God, her only friend. One recess, some boys caught her talking to herself. When they asked who she was talking to, she replied that she was conversing with God. Naturally, everyone around started laughing and mocking her even more. Some even said God didn't exist because if he did, he wouldn't have created someone as ugly and weird as her. Heartbroken, Jane walked home every day, kicking pebbles along the way, crying, and thinking she couldn't endure the constant mistreatment. Sitting on a park bench, she begged, "Please God, I just want him to like me. I wish I could eat with him during recess. I wish they would listen to me. That's all I want, my God." Jane often ate in the bathroom to avoid being seen by the popular girls, especially the leader, Giovanna, who thought she was the prettiest and most special girl in school and couldn't stand Jane for being different and not showing jealousy like the other girls. Giovanna was conceited and spoiled. Her parents gave her everything, so she thought she ruled the school. Time passed, and nothing improved. Jane continued to wake up at the same time, kneel and pray for change, but nothing changed. Still, her faith never wavered. As her 16th birthday approached in September, she prayed every day for friends and for her classmates to like her. On one class day, the students decided to throw a party organized by Giovanna at the end of the month since her pampered parents owned a party hall and catered to her every whim. Jane decided not to attend since her parents wouldn't allow it anyway. On the morning of September 27th, Jane awoke, turned to the window, and looked at the sky, hoping for a beautiful day with a radiant sun and white clouds. Instead, to her disappointment, the weather was overcast with grey skies and strong winds. The forecast predicted heavy rain, which Jane hated. It made her feel disheartened just looking outside. Nonetheless, she dressed and was about to leave for school when her mother called, "Jane, honey, can you come to the kitchen for a minute?" Following her mother, Jane encountered a small chocolate cake with sprinkles and two pink candles shaped like the numbers 1 and 6 on them. Her parents began singing, "Happy Birthday," and Jane, an only child, was deeply moved. She knew times were tough financially, so this surprise filled her with joy. She relished a piece of cake, and before she finished, her mother presented her with a beautifully decorated box, saying, "I hope you like it. It's not store-bought, but I made it just how you wanted. Open it, open it." Inside the box was a sky blue sweatshirt with lace-embroidered sleeves. Jane had admired a similar one in a store window on their way home from church days earlier, knowing it was too expensive for them. Her heart swelled with joy as she realized her mother had made an identical one for her. She put on the sweatshirt, hugged her parents, and said, "I love everything. I love you both so much." Arriving at school, the popular girls immediately began mocking her new sweatshirt, calling it ugly. When Jane mentioned it was a gift from her mother, the girls said, "Well, we brought a gift for you too. We'll give it to you during recess." You'll like it much more. Jane was skeptical but curious. During recess, as she was eating in the cafeteria since it was raining and she couldn't go to her usual spot, the popular girls approached. Giovanna said, "Look what we have for you." Jane couldn't believe it when they placed a small birthday cake on the table and began gathering people to sing, "Happy Birthday." They put a candle on the cake and lit it. Jane was overjoyed, still in disbelief, until the candle burned down and exploded a black ink balloon hidden inside. The cake was fake, just another cruel joke. Jane was covered in ink, and her new sweatshirt was stained. Giovanna laughed mockingly, "Enjoy it, and come like this to our party tonight." Everyone laughed as Jane ran away and locked herself in the school bathroom until it was time to go home. Arriving home crying, her parents were shocked. Her mother hugged her and cried with her. Jane took a bath, lay down, and cried for the rest of the day. At dusk, her father came to check on her. Jane opened her heart to him, saying, "Dad, I can't take it anymore. I can't stand that school anymore. Nothing I do is enough. They don't want me there. They'll never accept me. What's wrong with me, Dad? Why me? I'm so faithful to God, yet nothing gets better." She continued crying. Paul, seeing his daughter in tears, sat beside her on the bed and with a heavy heart said, "Listen, my daughter, I know you're suffering, but I'm sure things will change. Keep believing in God." He continued, "You have to be strong because you were born to do great things." With tears still in her eyes, Jane asked, "And what great things are those, Dad?" "So far, I've only suffered." Paul wiped her tears and said, "God knows what great things those are, my dear. You just have to have faith." He hugged Jane and concluded, "Now sleep a little, and don't worry because there's nothing you can't handle as long as you have God in your heart." Then he left the room, leaving Jane alone with her thoughts. Still crying, Jane looked at the gloomy weather outside her window and listened to the rain hitting the glass, reflecting on what her father had just said. She remembered her classmates and felt something troubling her, a strange feeling. She thought it was just bitterness eating at her heart. With tears still in her eyes, she spoke to God, "Dear God, I know I'm suffering, but I'll keep believing that one day you'll let me accomplish something great. Even though my heart hurts a lot right now, I still believe. I'll keep enduring." Before she could finish her prayer, she fell asleep. It was around 6 p.m., and it had just gotten dark. Jane began dreaming about Giovanna's party hall and her classmates arriving for the party. It was raining heavily, yet they kept coming. The music was blaring, mixing with the sound of thunder. There were lights and plenty of food. She saw the youngsters chatting, dancing, and having fun. Suddenly, a loud thunderclap sounded, and she looked up to see a crack in the ceiling of the hall. With the rain, the crack was widening until suddenly, she saw the ceiling collapsing on her classmates. She screamed, but her voice didn't come out. Then she heard a loud, sweet voice from the heavens saying, "You have to help them, my daughter." Jane tried to run to their aid and then woke up screaming. Her parents rushed into her room, very frightened, asking what had happened. Still terrified, Jane jumped out of bed and rushed to the door. Her puzzled parents followed, asking, "What happened, daughter? What's wrong?" Jane, already at the door, said, "I heard the voice of God, Dad. Something terrible is going to happen. I have to stop it." And she ran out into the rain towards the party hall, a few blocks away. Her parents, still not understanding what was happening, ran after her. Arriving at the hall soaking wet and frightened, Jane yelled for everyone to get out. However, she was completely ignored. Some of her classmates laughed, and others were stunned by her appearance. They simply kicked her out before she could do anything. Recalling her nightmare, Jane saw the crack in the ceiling and panicked even more. She began screaming, "The ceiling is going to collapse. It's cracked. Look, you need to get out of here now." But no one believed her. They didn't even look up. After they threw the poor girl out, they returned to the party, closing the door in her face. Persistent, Jane went around to the back entrance, completely drenched and muddy. She spotted the fire alarm and decided to activate it. Everyone then began running out of the party hall, scared by the fire alarm and not understanding what was happening. Right after everyone was outside, Jane approached them and said it was she who had triggered the alarm. The youngsters were very upset, and a shouting match ensued. Giovanna lunged at Jane, knocking her to the ground. "You're crazy. Do you realize what you've done? You ruined the party, you idiot. You've ruined my party. I'm going to beat you up so you'll never forget it." At that moment, some people pulled Giovanna away and tried to keep her from Jane. Her religious parents arrived and shielded their daughter, telling everyone to back off. Giovanna continued screaming and trying to break free to hit the poor girl. "Your daughter is crazy. She needs to be locked up. I'm going to beat her up. Let me go now, let me go." Before Giovanna could break free to attack Jane again, everyone heard a very loud noise, and a lightning strike hit the party hall. Immediately, the ceiling of the hall collapsed, and everything under it was destroyed. Everyone there was paralyzed, unable to react or believe what they had just witnessed. In shock, they looked at Jane, who was almost crying and also in shock. For a moment, no one could say a word. Some began crying, others hugged each other, and some held their heads, wondering if what had just happened was real. Jane was right, the ceiling had collapsed, and if they had still been inside, they would all be dead. Giovanna, devastated, could only stare at the hall. But as soon as she regained consciousness, she turned her attention to Jane, who was still lying on the ground, seemingly in disbelief that this had really happened just like in her dream. Giovanna ran towards Jane, hugged her, and began to cry. Everyone there was deeply shaken, but they also began to approach Jane and hug her, crying. They said, "We're sorry, Jane, for never having believed in you. We're sorry." Little by little, they began smiling and feeling relieved that Jane had saved their lives. They started clapping for Jane, and she, in disbelief, began to cry. But this time, it was tears of joy. Jane stood up and received many hugs and praises. Her parents began to cry, seeing their daughter receiving all the love and attention she had always desired from her classmates. Everyone was very happy and began to believe in her, that God really existed and had used Jane to save them from a huge tragedy. And so, Jane felt in her heart a feeling she had never felt before, the love of her classmates, who from that day on began treating Jane as she always deserved. What do you think of this story? Do you think they acted right? Leave your comment below to know your opinion, it is very important to us. If you like this exciting story, help us by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Thank you very much for watching us and see you in the next story.